So, as I was thinking about this week's topic, I thought about the toughest messages I've ever had to deliver. The first was business related. It was early on in my career, and we were visiting one of our branches, and there were multiple financial advisors at different branches for the institution we were visiting. And my boss, without any forewarning, said, "Hey, when you're done with your compliance branch inspection, I need you to fire the advisor." And I was maybe 6 to 9 months into my career at that point. And I totally punted back. I was just like, I can't do that. Instinctively, I knew I didn't have the skill to get that done. On top of that, it was, I remember, on my birthday, which is December 20th, so 5 days before Christmas, and I also knew that that advisor had had his fourth child 2 days prior. So talk about a tough message. And my boss ended up going in and releasing that financial advisor. It was the right decision, and maybe not the most emotionally nice time to do it, but speaking of social styles, that boss was a super driver of all drivers, so there was very little relationship going on. Second toughest message I ever had to deliver was actually to one of my two best friends. He had very strong feelings for a female friend of ours, and I knew that she actually had started a relationship with our other best friend. And the best friend to whom I had to deliver the message did not know that that relationship had started. It was kind of on the down low in our group of friends because just the way that it developed, they had kept it quiet. And so standing in the backyard of my house, I literally just had to give him this message that, hey, she's not in love with you and she's never going to be in love with you. Now, I didn't use any of what we're going to talk about today. I just steamrolled him with the information, mostly because I knew him as a person, that he wasn't going to listen to me unless I just completely steamrolled him. But also because I had a huge amount of emotional deposits, and so I knew that regardless of what happened on the back end, and everything worked out fine. In fact, the second best friend and that wonderful woman are now married and have 2 lovely children, and all is well in the world, but was still a very, very tough conversation to have. But it's, these 2 tough message stories are what popped into my mind. And really, with both of them, I didn't use any of the things that we're going to be discussing today for very different reasons. A, in the first story, because I didn't know any of it at that point, and then B, in the second one, because I didn't really need to, given the situation. But I think they both very well illustrate why you need to have some skills around the concept of tough messages, because if you don't have those skills and you're not in one of those situations where you can, like I in the first story, could punt to my boss, or B, where I had enough emotional deposits just to give the message unvarnished and extremely strong, you can cause some real problems in your interpersonal relationships. So with that, we are going to start episode 12 of the Value Ability Podcast, Delivering Tough Messages, and hopefully we will give you some tips and tools for handling them better than how I did with those two stories. The Value Ability Podcast is for financial advisors, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. We believe that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. My name is Danforth Fleek. I have been a financial advisor and product wholesaler for over 20 years in the financial services industry. I am joined each week by my co-host and longtime mentor and good friend, Philip Simonson. Philip's been in business and financial services for over 40 years as a financial advisor, field leader, leadership development expert, and we have finally transitioned, Philip, from the winter season into the other great season in Minnesota, which of course is road construction.
I knew that was coming. Yeah, so true.
Absolutely. How has spring/summer set up in the Great North? Here it's already hot and humid again. It's the thing I love. The 2 days into quote unquote summer, and we're already miserably hot and complaining about it down in Minneapolis.
Well, I thought about that the other day when every evening I take my dog, our little yellow lab Otis, for a walk, and I noticed that, just a month ago, we had what we call Indian snow, a patchy here, a patchy there, and now we've got green. All the leaves are out. We hit 80 degrees, and bam, forget spring. You just go right into summer, and I'm grateful, Dan. I'm not going up I-35 or going down I-35 on these long weekend treks up to the lake. That the lake has finally become my home, and I can just empathize for those people who have to sit in that car and not move anywhere on the interstate for half hour, 40 minutes, and not even going out a mile, or maybe they go a couple. So all's well. I'm feeling great.
Excellent. You can find the Value Ability Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, or you can find us on our YouTube channel. Search Value-Ability on YouTube. Of course, you can also find us on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the Episodes tab, and you should be able to find all of our episodes there. Wherever you find us, always the universal mantra of podcasters across the galaxy: like, review, subscribe, and share. And again, at this point in our podcast, sharing is really the best thing you can do for us. If you enjoy the podcast and what we're doing, please let other people know about it. Sign up for our mailing list. We put out lots of free content to all of our listeners, but we also have exclusive content, additional content on our topics that we put out for our mailing list subscribers. Sign up at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. Also, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at value_ability on both of those platforms. Twitter is where you can connect with us and ask questions, propose topics if there are things you would like us to cover. Instagram is where we put all of our visuals. So if you're on the go and you want to look at a visual, some of the stuff we get into requires looking at the document that we're talking about. And so we try to make it available in lots of different areas. So if you're on the run on your phone and you want to find it, we post it on Instagram. We also do put it a link on our website to all of the documents that we talk about. We're also on Facebook. If that's your primary social media outlet, you can find us on Facebook. Search @Valuability, all one word there. So, Philip, delivering tough messages.
Well, your message to Tyler reminded me in the backyard.
I was going to keep him anonymous, but now he's outed. It's
okay. Tyler.
He'll live. He's expressive,
and he'll. It's coming from a loving spot here.
No recognition is bad recognition.
So reminds me of Harvey, and I was very fortunate to work with 3 to 4 great mentors in my life. 40 years of working in the business and environment. And the first one was Harvey Gollum. Harvey ended up, he initially was, you might have heard me mention it before, the managing director of McKinsey and Company. And particularly his emphasis was on the business development. And around the business development, it was really / people development. He truly believed in training and educating your people. He ended up taking over IDS from IDS, and he ended up being president of American Express, then chairman of American Express, and came out of retirement for a couple years and worked, I think, for a couple dollars and took over AIG and went along with another gentleman I didn't know well, but he hired me out as a consultant. He used to run MetLife. God bless his soul, since died. But Harvey used to say, do you want it with the bark on or bark off? Either way, you're going to get it.
I've heard that a couple times.
Right? Or, Dan, the Wailing Wall's right down the hall. Now,
also heard that a couple of times. So much so that I can usually say it before you as I start complaining and I get to the end of my complaint and I'm just going to go down to the Wailing Wall.
And the bark on, bark off, if you've got the deposits in like you had with your friend, it's the message is, hey, I care about you. And if I care enough about you, I'm going to say something. By not saying anything is saying you don't care. So that's what, first how you need to look at this conflict resolution. Because if you're the leader, and many of you who are listening here you run your own individual practices, you're independent contractors, you might have staff, you might not have staff. Some of you might, you need to, unless you were fortunate to have an experience like I had, working for a Fortune 100 company who really invested a lot in its people, you're just learning on the fly. And that can be hard. And so what I would share with you is today now are a couple tips on how to deliver what I call a whole message. But before we begin these tips, one of the, first, let me just say conflict when it usually arises. And when you need to address it, is when you start seeing productivity diminish, or the relationships have become so acidic that it's like poison and it's destroying your culture. You then need to step in. But hopefully you can first have the people who are impacted, who have the conflict with each other, have them work it out first. But if they can't, then you have to come in as the mediator.
So in that realm, minor conflict, then you just kind of let exist, right?
Yeah, it's and I'll bring it up in my one-on-one and try to help coach them with them. And I used to have one-on-ones with my staff at least weekly, and for 30 minutes. And when this conflict does occur, it usually then occurs as a result of people do not understand who owns what process, could be an example. Or how is my work related to the goals that we're trying to achieve here? Or how, I seem to be bumping up against this, this other department when I'm trying to, with this project. those are, that's when conflict naturally does occur. Then that's when productivity will start diminishing. But otherwise, yes, Dan, if it's not major, I'm gonna let it go. Now, feedback is different too. We're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. But feedback can both be positive or it can be negative. And let's just build on it now. And let's take feedback. When you see something that a behavior that you do not like, and it violates one of your principles at work or one of your values, etc., that you might have. If it's negative feedback, you want to address it immediately, and of course, feedback should always be done in private, and you praise in public. And anytime you give feedback or in this conflict resolution, get rid of the royal we. Stay with I. That's the first thing. Secondly, we're going to talk more about this later in the article review, the great questions of a mentor. But we've highlighted this before. Use what questions. What questions versus the why questions. Why it's okay to use when you're asking for clarification, but otherwise why, should've, would've, could've, those are all shaming questions. And shame is when one feels badly about oneself, and guilt is when one feels badly about one's behavior. Big difference there. Too much shame, not a good thing. That's a death spiral. And in our jobs as leaders, as parents, or as partners or spouses, you want to continue building particularly your children's self-esteem so they can go out on their own and survive. You don't want to use those shaming words with them.
You've pointed out in previous episodes as well that why is an inward seeking question, right?
Excuse me, I got too close, but what is the inward seeking question? Thank you, Dan.
Okay. Is why not as well? And that to me would seem like...
Why not? It can get there, but it's not. The what will take them directly inside. And what you're doing there is giving them the opportunity to come up with their own insight and aha moment. And when they get that, then you have a better chance of long-term behavior changing. Now, the why not is, what it can do, it trips their emotional triggers, and we're hardwired as individuals to be emotional first. And, if that why not was not used in the right tonality or in the right manner when they were young, oh boy, here we go. I'm going back to parent-child again. And that's not a good,
Sure.
You're not putting them in a good emotional state to take the feedback.
That makes sense.
So then with the, continuing on that light, then with feedback, if you want to, I would encourage you now, if it's positive feedback, well, make sure that if it's been, and this feedback can also, if it's positive, sometimes it's okay to use that positive feedback in a public forum, and to recognize that team or that unit. And if you're the leader of that unit, etc., or you're the one being the recipient of that feedback, if other people have helped you in a way in which you would not have received that feedback without their help, make sure you recognize them. That's just going to continue to build that team loyalty to you then. And because there's that source of power, reverent loyalty. People follow you because they want to follow you, not by, versus power by title. They have to follow you because you can reward or punish them. So that reverent loyalty is the best source of power. So,
is there any time where, I'd find personally public praise very uncomfortable? I don't mind and this is something that I had figured out once you started teaching me some of these things, social styles and these kind of things, that I don't mind hearing myself being praised. Like if I'm in an audience and they're talking about me, or they're talking about my department and saying, hey, Dan's done a great job, or this department's done a great job, that I can handle. It's still a little bit uncomfortable, but getting called up in front of a group and praised is horribly uncomfortable for me. So with that, you need to understand your team's individual social styles, right? And then just clear it with them. Because usually some of that is surprise. Like if it's surprised, if I'm surprised by it, it's a total no-win. I'm embarrassed and uncomfortable. If I'm asked, hey, I want to bring you up and, give this feedback, give this praise, I can usually get to a place where I'm like, yeah, that's okay. I can deal with that. I know it's coming, and I'll kind of steel myself for it. So, but different people have definitely different reactions, even to positive feedback, right?
Oh, absolutely. And what I encourage those people who, are maybe more introverted and are not accustomed to the feedback. Now, for me, being expressive, recognition's my base need. I love it. And if someone tries to steal something, recognition from something I created, I'm going to, watch out, I'm coming after you. And I'm just saying that because I'm perfectly imperfect. I know myself. And success, I think, I'm going to share is, and what I've learned is when you start, you get to a point in life when you become comfortable with yourself. I'm going to repeat that. Success is when you start becoming comfortable with yourself. And for those who, you bring up two good points. One, those who are impacted by a decision should be the first to know. So if that's know your people, hey, we're going to have this meeting. I want to give you recognition and praise. I want to let you know ahead of time so you can, plan for it too. And you can give some coaching points into those people. But I would also just encourage, if you're, again, as Dan shared about how he views praise, public praise, but just listen, enjoy, and then just accept the feedback by saying thank you. What you don't want to do is don't discount the person's opinion about yourself or your work. So I would say that, Dan, on that piece. You also bring up the second point I wanted to address. Now, constructive feedback. I said give constructive feedback in private, and of course praise in public, right? Or recognize in public. Now, the other piece, well, how about a group or a team? When's it okay to provide feedback to a team? And it is, if you have to give constructive feedback to a team, when there are problems with the processes. That's when you want to focus in. Then when you're giving, and it's appropriate. Again, as long as it's a group process at that particular time.
Do you, in that type of group setting, can you get the group together? Obviously you're not doing it in front of the whole company or the whole team, but you get your group together and start that then, which is kind of open-ended questions. Right? And,
yes.
Hey, we're taking a look at this process. What do you guys think about this process and how it's going, and kind of get a temperature of things? Because people are going to know if a process isn't functioning well, and now we're having a meeting about it, likely where it's going to go. But then, giving them that opportunity to voice their opinion first, rather than, hey, this process sucks. Now let's talk about it.
Well, okay. Now you lead into a whole message model, and I want to discuss that whole message model. And it's what I learned from American Express, and when they hired out, you go up, and I think I don't think I ended up being a senior vice president, and they what they want to make sure you know they put you through assessments to become a director, then it's a VP, then senior vice president. Excuse me, I was senior vice president at ING. I turned down the group vice president position at Amex to run a market. There's 45 markets, and you turn down enough time. You turn down enough promotions. Eventually, then you have to move on, and I did after 15, 16 years, and it was a great ride. But they put us through assessments, and they paid this group PDI, and it's Personal Development Inc. Great couple books on management and executive leadership skills. I would recommend to anyone. Now, what they taught me was this whole message model, because sometimes I would just, that amiable, remember we talked about that session, Social Styles. If haven't listened to it, it's one of our most liked and most listened to. Go back to it. But if you're not, if you're not getting your base need, and as an amiable, it is to feel liked. And I'm definitely very a people-oriented person, and I'll do anything to save the relationship. I'll put a lot of deposits in, but at some point I'll get a boiling point, and because the relationship's not going well, and the tension is rising. So usually with that, when tension rises for an amiable, they acquiesce, and they'll just start saying yes, and because they want to save the relationship. However, you combine mine with my my predominant style, expressive. Well, if you're not, the expressive isn't getting the recognition, and the tension then is going up, and they go into what they call their backup style, and the backup style there is attack. So sometimes I would just dump on people. And they're sitting there, whoa, why? What's going on? What did I do? Well, I wasn't given the whole message. So what I would, in the whole message model I'm going to share with you now, I would start off with I see. It's made up of I see, I think, I feel, I want. Or observations, thoughts, feelings, goals. So the first time, if you're going to be given this critical feedback, and it's a group meeting, and like you described, Dan, well, you want to make sure first that you share your observations. And the observations that you're going to be sharing here, in this particular case, is on processes, on performance, and then what you want to do is demonstrate that you have active listening skills. And after, you share, here's, group, I want to share with you some observations or our actual results against goals here today. And then you want to, when you do that, and after you're done sharing that with them, then you want to ask them some open-ended questions, just as you said. Spot on, Dan. And then you want to demonstrate the active listening skills. You want to paraphrase. And you can paraphrase. Some of it can be verbal or nonverbal. Paraphrasing is demonstrating that you're active listening. So I want to correct myself. If you're paraphrasing, of course, it has to be verbal. The active listening can be nonverbal or verbal. And nonverbal example of active listening is shaking your head or going, mm-hmm, uh-huh. That's demonstrating. So then they're feeling that they've been heard. Because you always want to touch the heart before the brain here. Then okay, after you paraphrase, and paraphrasing could just be an example of, let me summarize. Here's what I think I've heard. Because too many people will go into the mental judo game. In the mental judo game, and that's that game that's being played 6 inches between your ears. That's that self-talk. And I'm not, and it looks like this. I'm not even listening to the person who's now giving me their rebuttal or their reasoning, etc. I'm looking at my counter argument. I'm framing my counter argument, so I'm not even listening to them.
Even worse, with most tough messages, you'll come in and rehearse, right, beforehand. So you're starting to have that conversation. It could be, hours, days, weeks beforehand, where you're playing through how that conversation is going to go in your mind, and how am I going to say this? And you may enter the conversation if you don't have this process. And I think you've also in the past suggested that you write these things down, correct? Because you may enter the conversation halfway through rebutting arguments that they haven't even proposed and totally confuse them, take them off guard, light them up emotionally, and just make a total train wreck of the whole thing because you've been rehearsing this and playing it back in your mind for the last, however many days, right? And so being objective about it, writing it down, understanding, and starting with this process, like anything, it's a skill. You need to hone that skill. And I've seen you do it on the fly because you've done it now for 30 plus years, but I still write these down if I need to do them because I've never managed to the level that you have in your career. And so when I do deliver messages, I still need to have it all objectively written down.
Yes. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll have out on valuability, not the full version of this, because if you want, shameless plug,
yes.
If you want some coaching on this and some in-depth tools on giving constructive feedback or overcoming conflict resolution or and using the whole message model, give us a call and we'll work with you. But there's also one of the tools, a part of the whole message is how to map this out. So as we were saying, share your observations, ask and then open-ended questions. Hey, am I reading this right? Is it and then if they say yes, well, here's what it's causing, these observations or these results are causing me to think this way. So then share your thoughts, and then you can also, that self-talk, share the question. As a result of these results or this behavior, it's causing me to think this way. And particularly, and then can you see, then you're clarifying, questions can and to seek to make sure they understand why you're causing you're thinking this way. You could just ask them. Can you see why I'm thinking this way? Or am I reading this wrong?
Right.
And then you wait and then okay. Well, as a result of that, here's what it's causing me to feel. Now, feelings generally come down to sad, mad, or glad, and you got to demonstrate how you're actually feeling, and say it, and don't elaborate on it. Just make it short and quick. As a result of that, these observations and what is causing me to think, it's making me feel disappointed, or I feel hurt. That's all you need to say.
Right, don't belabor the point.
No. and then just say, okay, all right. I don't, that's how I'm feeling. Can you see why I'm feeling this way? And then get ready. And then the next is, as a result of that, what I want to do is work with you as an individual or as a group to come up with some solutions here. Don't attack the people. Let's come up with some solutions.
Right? Many times you get into this and realize that your impression of things is just totally wrong.
Yes.
Right? That this is what I'm seeing. You confirm it with them and person's just like, what are you talking about? No, that's not at all. My dog died.
Yeah.
It's just totally a different topic altogether. Whereas if you come in and you're like, you know what, I'm mad, their emotional state goes up, they get upset, like you're blah 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 blah. Like, well, it's because my dog died. Now you just made a total mess of things, right? Like,
yes.
Like you've wrecked their day. They've gotten their emotional state upended. It can resolve fairly quickly. And if you have, like we've mentioned, emotional deposits with those people, you can, get beyond that. But it tends to create a situation where you have a leader. I did during my career have a leader who was like this, who would come in and just totally steamroll me. And to the point where when I would finally react, he would then backpedal and say, "Oh, no, that's not at all what I meant," and we'd clarify things and usually be able to put things back together and move on pretty quickly. Interestingly, this will lead into a point that I definitely wanted to make, is that boss ended up going and getting a advanced degree in management, and he did a complete 180. Ended up being, besides you, the best soft manager I had. By the end of our 7 years working together, he had completely reversed and learned the management techniques that he could apply, and started to understand my social styles and adapt to how I needed messages. And it allows me to make that point of, look, if you're a single person office, or you're growing a business and you're now transitioning into having to deal with managing processes and managing people, these are not skills that you are born with, right? These are skills you need to learn. You may have tendencies toward certain things that allow you to be better at them than other people, but nobody is born with an innate ability to provide a whole message like this. This is something you learn and develop as a skill, and even just like any skill, doing it makes you better, and you need to practice it, and you need to revisit it. And so don't beat yourself up if this is something that you're not necessarily good at. The skills that make people good entrepreneurs and good at starting businesses aren't necessarily the skills and traits that are good at growing businesses beyond a certain point. And so that's, to add on to Philip's point, a great time for you to reach out to us and get a little bit of coaching and guidance on some of these topics. And like Philip mentioned, the document that we're going to share is only a piece of the whole message model. We have much more on that side to share as well. So anything on the main topic before we wrap up?
I got a couple. I'd like to just share a couple other tips. We got time, Dan?
Sure.
All right. Just, a couple and here we go. One, what I've observed, people project on the outside how they're feeling on the inside. And, just think back when you've interacted with someone, you thought to yourself, their attitude is not quite right, but you cannot put a finger on it. Well, don't go away from your intuition, but, try to, probe more into it. And as what Dan said earlier, using the I, starting off with observations or thoughts, or this is what is causing me to think, or and is my thinking right or is it wrong? That clarifies things right away, and you could be going down the wrong path. Now, fighting fair. These are just some other little quick tips. Fighting fair, what does that look like? It's, if it's over 48 hours, let it go. Don't continue to hold the person hostage. Now, we have people out there who are business owners. We have people out there who are running, individual practices, but they're also parents. And, your children, particularly your teenage children, they're going to drive you crazy. I love my children deeply. And, the teenage years, boy, I think, children can be overrated. And you can be sure of this, Paul Moore, if you're listening out there over in the UK, when he used to say, you can be sure the sins of the father will fall upon the feet of the son. Well, I remember the police, they would bring home my boys, and they'd say, well, Mr. Simonson, it was that one at night. I got to just tell you, your boys really are honest. Okay. They'd been drinking. And what did I do it? Absolutely. God bless, and I'm grateful for, with my boys and with myself, etc. No one got hurt. And I don't condone this behavior, but it does happen. But so when it does occur, make sure this, for particular boys, the prefrontal cortex of the brain does not get developed till age 25. That's why, girls, their insurance will go down after 25. For boys' cars insurance, it stays there till actually 25. Because usually it's first thought wrong. It's, they get emotional, that hits the limbic, and then they just act. So when they're, that time in which, you're in a high emotional state, with your children, mine was they're being brought home and they've been drinking. That's not the time to dump on them. Just go to bed. We'll talk tomorrow. And the shame thing. Now, shame is okay. A little bit of shame is okay. And when they feel badly about themselves, make sure your message is quick and to the point. And I used to like to come up with this. Look, I want you to listen to me because I'm coming from a loving spot. And I love you, but I don't love your behaviors. And also like a good judge now, and then you can share your observations, thoughts, feelings, goals. But like a good judge, you don't pass, the sentencing on the day the verdict comes in. And also you want them to learn from their mistakes. So ask, you're still, it's a republic, not a democracy, but say, okay, I want you to go back and reflect on this. And what did you learn? And what do you think should be the consequences for this behavior? And then if it's not what you think is appropriate in regard to the consequences or to right this wrong, then you get to override it.
Excellent. I just wanted to wrap up the main section just with the basic kind of process that I always still use for giving what I refer to as low-level feedback. If you're not dealing with something that's a major breakdown or, high conflict, but it's still something that you need to have that person listen to. And you taught me this as well back in the day, is just the basic sandwich method, right? Positive, critical, positive, right? And that, the positivity portion works across the board with all of these, right? The positive, whether you're talking to someone in terms of conflict or you're having a discussion with somebody with whom you disagree about something, starting off by focusing on the things that you share gets the person to basically just drop their dukes. That's the way that I think of it, right? If you come in to any situation with criticism or negative emotion, it's the fight or flight syndrome, as you mentioned, right? Your fists go up and you're ready to battle. And so starting off with that positivity just gets the person to drop that defense mechanism, get away from the emotional reaction, and allows them then to process things a little bit more intellectually. And then they get that information, and then you follow up again with positivity so that brings them back up emotionally, and they don't dwell in that, critical or negative feedback. So that's just a little tip there for kind of daily run-of-the-mill feedback. It's just something I do just, even if it's a short bit of information. Like as an example, I used to do it with my housekeeper. When my mom lived with me, we'd have someone come and clean the apartment. And I'd always say, hey, you know what? Love having you come in. It's a great job. You do a great job. Next time you come, could you make sure you dust at the top of the blinds or whatever it was that I wanted? And, thanks again for coming. It's awesome to have you here. Now, and even just that little bit of feedback, it smooths things across. And so with that, we will end up the main topic, delivering tough messages. Again, if you want further information, reach out to us on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the Contact Us tab, or you can find us on our Twitter account. Just shoot us a message and say, hey, I'd like to speak with you guys more about your whole message model.
Dan, can I piggyback on one thing?
Sure.
You raise a great point. When that amygdala hijack occurs and you're in that high emotional negative state of anger, frustration, disappointment, usually, as we said, first thought wrong. But if the conflict is escalating where you cannot think clearly and you're starting to yell and you're starting to shout, what I would encourage you to do is, just walk away. Words over centuries have probably killed more souls than weapons have ever done. So just, you know what? I'm getting to a point where, I'm too emotional, and I don't want to regret anything I might say here that would damage our relationship because I value it. I just need to walk away at the present time, and let's set up a time where we can talk about this tomorrow when I've settled down, and then just walk away. Do not get caught being baited and run back, and to come back into that relationship. Walk away.
Right, because that will be oftentimes the reaction of someone that just doesn't want to get better or respond, right, is to just try and drag you into a fight, right, so that they can then use whatever their escape behavior is, right? That's the interesting thing I've learned about the brain over the years. That amygdala is connected directly to your memory bank, right? And so your emotions read off of your memory bank. And so as an example, in my family, when my dad would trigger arguments, he would trigger arguments because he wanted to leave. And that was his way of dealing with conflict, was to escape. And because of that, I dread that time period where there's no resolution and dad was gone and there was just this pall of angst and negative emotion over the house because there'd been a fight and dad had stormed off. And so to this day, I am a hostile pursuer of resolution. And so, and it's just hardwired into my brain. I just cannot settle for there being unresolved conflict. And knowing that as well helps, because there are people for whom my pursuit is extremely uncomfortable. People that like to get away and cool down just cannot coexist with me because I will not leave them alone. And some of the examples, like my mother was like this. She hid my dad's Navy hat in the freezer because you're not allowed to show up on base out of uniform, and not having your hat, not having your cover is out of uniform. She knew he couldn't leave without his hat, so she stuck it in the freezer so he couldn't find it. So that's also a thing you need to understand about yourself, is that a lot of these things are hardwired into your own brain. They're also hardwired into other people's brains based on your memory. And so, don't beat yourself up. Don't beat other people up when they react a certain way in these situations. Go back to the process, rely on the process. And like you said, if you need to step away and let the emotions de-escalate.
Right.
So
what I've also can share is for those who are listening, look, there's always a little dysfunction in every family. You just hope you make sure that the fun hasn't left dysfunction. And, point is, some people will argue, particularly if there's addictions. They argue and then will start a fight, so that gives them the reason to go out and drink because you made me do that. And don't fall into that trap for some of you. And then you shake our family tree and a bunch of CIAs fall out, Catholic Irish alcoholics. So it's part of life, and we're all perfect and imperfect, but you just need to have these tools to put in your tool belt so that you can have better coping skills. And now let's get to the mentorship, because we could go on and on. It's very good subject matter.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we will transition into our article for the week. The best mentors ask these 8 questions. I'm just going to go through, since it's only 8, I'm going to go through and just share them real quickly. So what does success look like to you? What is the outcome you want? What do you want to be different in 3 to 5 years? What are the obstacles you're facing? What can you control? What are the options you've come up with? Tell me more. And what are you reading? Now, I have to admit, when I first read this article, the main reason why I picked it out for us to cover is almost all of these questions you have asked me as my mentor. So I wanted to, first of all, give the expressive some recognition.
Thank you, Dan.
One of the best mentors.
Thank you. Sincerely.
Well, I mean, your biggest one is the 3 to 5 years. We use that in the advisor side, dealing with clients. You've always used that with me as a mentor, as well as understanding where you're going is key to getting there. If you don't have a map, you're not going to get there. And there's so many different analogies that we use around this, but it is 100% true. You've got to have those goals. You got to know where you're going in order to get there. And just some vague idea of, hey, we want to start a business. We have that in this enterprise. At times, we've veered off course and had to go back to when we first started. We started by sitting down and creating a plan. This is what we're trying to accomplish. And when we veered off that, we've been able to catch ourselves and say, hey, wait, this is not serving our end goal where we want to be in 3 to 5 years. We need to get off this course and get back to where we're going. That's the one to me that leapt out as the one of the biggest, because it is such a key component to mentorship.
Yes, and I love, questions are the answers, and you can tell the quality of the person by the quality of the questions they're asking. And I love the 3 to 5 year one myself, and I like it. Particularly, I just use 3 years because that's just 1 year after this year, and business world is changing so dramatically. It just makes it easier to put my arms around. Another great question, though, to ask here is, it was the president of China. He was over visiting the younger Bush as president. And the president of China asked our president, "What keeps you up at night?" And Bush said, "Well, another 9/11 attack." Now, he then said, "Wait, what keeps you up at night?" He says, "Trying to figure out how to feed nearly 1.5 billion people." And wow. At some point, there are, I thought that was just, that's what's keeping you up at night. It certainly is a great question to ask to get internal gut, what's going on with the person and what they're feeling and thinking. And the other one is, you say, what's your tipping point here? How much can you really put up with? When's enough? Because if you're going to be stupid, you better be strong. And the stupid is optional, particularly if you see, behaviors that are not going to be helping this person out. But as much as, from a mentorship standpoint, you want the mentee to come up with their own answers as much as possible. Some people go into coaching in this mentorship thinking, because in their lifetime, they weren't able to come up with their own answers, and so now they're able to give their advice and give their answers so that they can feel this internal gratitude that they think they're going to receive. Not the right reason. You want, again, it should be more question based. If you're going to ask for a mentor to help you out, just make sure then you get real clear on what you're looking for from the mentor, and the mentor as well, what he or she is looking for from you. Make sure you set your right boundaries, but questions are the answers here.
Yeah, we'll wrap up this section with a little story to illustrate the point that I'd like to make around sometimes these questions don't have to be quite so wide-ranging or wide in scope. Sometimes these questions can be extremely focused. So I was interviewing for my second job on the wholesale side of the financial services business. And I had gone through the first interview, and then I was brought back for the second interview, and the position that I was interviewing for was a manager on the outbound internal sales desk for this company. And the sales desk manager took me to his boss after our second interview, and we kind of just a little quick meet and greet for the big boss to get a idea of my personality. And we were chatting, and he looked at my resume and asked me a question that to this day, outside of the things that you have done to help my career, is still the most important thing that has guided where I ended up going in my career. He asked me this question. He said, if I could offer you a VP role in sales, marketing, or operations, equal pay, which one would you take right now? And I responded immediately, operations, because I had started out my career in operations and I had been very happy doing that. And then when I got into sales, I struggled at times. And he very correctly said to me then, I think you need to go home and really think about the answer to that question, because if you go into operations in a big corporation, you're going to die. You're not built for that. You are much more suited for sales, and you just don't know it. So go home and think about that. And if you still want this job, it's yours, but you need to be ready to commit to it. And I went home, and it was one of those moments where the scales fell off my eyes, and I was like, you know what? He's right. I don't want to sit in operations meetings the rest of my life. I do enjoy talking to people. I do enjoy the sales process. And I had just built up this history in my mind that I had been happy doing a job that had been labeled operations, but actually then when I went back and thought about it, that job very quickly switched from being an operations job to being a relationship management job. And so while I thought of it as operations, it really wasn't. It was really client service. I was doing some sales as well and some relationship management. So yeah, sometimes these questions can be a little bit more focused and rather than quite wide-ranging. And so I just wanted to share that story with folks, because sometimes it's honing in on something that specific that will help you out. So any last thoughts before we wrap up the episode?
Coming up to an hour, so let's rock and roll this thing and tell everyone have a happy Poets Day.
Excellent. So with that, we will wrap up for the week. We will save our question that keeps getting bumped for another week. And just remind people that if you have topics to cover that you would like us to cover, or questions for us, reach out to us on our Twitter account at @value_ability. You can also reach out to us on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the Contact Us tab. There's a contact form there that will get in touch with us. Or you can reach out to us on Facebook. Search at Valuability, all one word, on Facebook. Again, sign up for our mailing list if you'd like exclusive and additional content on the topics that we cover. You can do that also at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share, the mantra of podcasters across the known universe. Next week, taxes, the silent partner. We've already talked about the silent embezzler, inflation. Next week, we are going to talk about the silent partner, taxes. And with that, I want to say thank you for listening. As always, join us next week, and until then, remember that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances, and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.